Hi there guys, and welcome to this tutorial on English Language Paper 2 question 4, and as usual I'm referring to AQA, and with this tutorial I'm looking at the 2017 exam paper, the first live GCSE paper that students sat last summer. And as I'm guessing many of you will have actually done this as trial exam papers in preparations for the 2018 GCSEs. So hopefully you're familiar with these texts and you've gone over them and things in class. If you haven't, you should be able to get a copy of this exam paper and the extracts quite easily. Just ask your teacher, they'll be able to print you a copy off. And they may even be available on AQA's website now. So I've just made a few notes here because this is a 16 mark question, and as such I think it's worth recapping some of the stuff that we know that we need to do for this. So this question, just bear with me, this question is of course your comparison question, and in many ways this is one of the trickier questions that you'll come across. Some people think it's the hardest question on the papers, but it does indeed ask you to compare. And just to remind you, the comparison is similarities but it's also differences. So you're looking for writers' perspectives. Now, as I've said before in other tutorials, this might say point of view, it might say ideas, opinions, but really you're looking for that idea of what are their different points of view. Now, obviously in this, it does talk about their different perspectives. So just look carefully in the question, because although comparison does mean similarities and differences, if you're given a specific focus, then you've got to make sure that you draw attention to that in your answer. And you are looking at the whole of the sources, so you've got more to look at. So key things is, what are the different perspectives? In this case, it does say different. So I'm just going to cross that out, because in some questions it might ask you similarities, but I don't want to have any confusion here. So the differences, the methods, right? So just to remind you that methods basically means language and structure, but it can mean loads of other things about tone and style. But I think if you want to make life easy for yourself, you focus on language and structure. And references to both texts. It doesn't say quotes, but between you and me, I think that quotes that you can then zoom in on are going to put you in the best position. So I was just making some notes for myself. I would advise you to definitely do something like a little planning table like I've done here, where you just genuinely go through them and write down what are the perspectives. Now the question was clearly about their feelings about their children growing up. So there are points where I could see some similarities. So both of them have a degree of sadness. However, one thing I noticed when I looked through is that in source A, the writer, he's quite pleased and he accepts, really. I wonder if accepting might have been a better word in my planning there, the growth and change of his child. Where in source B, the mother feels very sad and filled with regrets that it's happened. Probably in source A, he's very surprised by it. This is the same to a degree, but perhaps a difference. And another difference I noticed was that he views it quite in amusing terms almost, where the mum seems to be really distressed by the idea of her son growing up. Now, in terms of just approaching this question as a bit of a recap, and I'm sure I mentioned this in the previous tutorial, but I think that some opening where you draw attention to both the texts and establish early on some of the core differences is a really good model, and something that you can apply for your exam, whatever text you have in front of you. So where you might say, both sources have got a degree of sadness towards their children growing up. However, whilst in source A the writer feels whatever that may be, in source B the writer is more or less whatever. So just as a little launch into your comparison of the writer's ideas, it's a good idea to do something a bit like that. And then I would be aiming to identify what those perspectives are in source A, and making sure that I am drawing attention to the methods the writer has used, giving examples and explaining them. And then looking at the perspectives in source B, are they similar, or in this case, you know, what are the differences that we can see? And I'd be aiming to do at least 2 comparisons. You know, it is worth 16 marks, this question, so I would encourage you to aim for 3, but it is important that you've done more than 1 comparison so that you've done at least 2. So that's kind of what I'd be aiming for if this was me. So let's just try and exemplify what a decent sort of response to this question could look like. So I'm going to use that structure that I just mentioned and sort of say that in both sources, now I know it's not asking for similarity, but I'm going to start with in both sources, the writers, now you could say show, but I think exhibit is a better word to use there. Exhibit degrees of sadness about the children growing up. So I'm almost drawing them together, but then to establish what the difference is about their children growing up. And then this is where I'm going to say, however. However, in source A, the father accepts, that was the word that I decided when in my planning was better than, he's not exactly delighted by it, accepts this natural growth, whereas, so I'm going to immediately introduce this as a difference, whereas in source A, in source B, the writer feels only, I'm going to say regret and a sense of loss. Now I just think it's really good practice to demonstrate to whoever's marking yours early on that you have got a clear comparison. I'm clearly establishing and identifying some differences in those writers' perspectives. Now, although I was saying in your planning kind of go source A and then source B, it doesn't actually matter particularly which order you go in, as long as you're looking for the writer's methods. Actually, I think I'll start with source B because I think that sort of sense of loss is really quite strong. So I'm going to just go straight into what the writer's perspective is in source B. So in source B, the writer, I mean, she seems to have this kind of longing and distress, doesn't she, about the childhood. So I think actually longing is quite a good word to use there. In source B, the writer's longing for her son's lost childhood, again, reinforcing that idea, she feels like it's lost, is shown through the use of, so you're just getting straight into methods and techniques here, through use of the phrase, let's have a look, phrases, let's look at 2 here because they're quite similar, phrases, but my eyes are aching and my ears are aching. Right, because those are really similar phrases, and they both, you know, we can put those together to make a broader observation about her perspectives here. So I'm going to, shown through the use of phrases, my eyes are aching and my ears are aching. So I'm going to say here, these phrases show, well, what do those 2 things, like her eyes are aching, her ears are aching? It seems quite hyperbolic, doesn't it? It's a sense of hyperbole and exaggeration here. But what it does seem to suggest is that loss is almost physical. She feels like a physical pain. These phrases, I'm just going to add that thing about hyperbole here. These phrases, which seem quite hyperbolic. Right, so then I'm going to go back to, what do they show us? Show that I'm going to go back to this sense of the longing. Her longing is almost physically painful, and her memories of him cause her discomfort and distress. Now, I've talked generally about those two phrases. What I've done here is I've really analysed the effect of those two examples. My eyes are aching, my ears are aching. I've got some terminology in here, and because I've used hyperbole and phrases, but I think I could even zoom in a bit more by talking about that word aching. Now you'll notice that aching, it's my ears are aching, it's in the present tense. So this is what we call the present participle. It shows that it's ongoing, and I think that's quite a sophisticated and interesting point I could make. So I'm going to focus on that verb aching. So it's actually repeated, isn't it? So I'm going to say the repetition of the, now I'm getting a bit fancy pants here, but the present participle verb aching. But don't worry if you can't remember that. If you could just say the verb aching is in the present, or you don't even need to mention the stuff about the tense, but if you think about the word aching, what does that suggest? So the repetition of the present participle verb aching suggests that, now I could use pain, but I've used it a couple of times, so I'm going to use a different word, that her anguish is ongoing, almost as though her suffering will never end. Right, so just to kind of recap what I've done here, because I think there's probably a few quite sophisticated bits here, but what I've done is I've made a point about the perspective of this writer. So I've said this writer feels longing for the son's childhood. Then what I've done is I've identified methods, the writer's use of basically techniques, and I've got some examples in there as well, which in the bullet point up at the top would talk about references, but I think really means quotes. So I've got some examples here, and then I've gone to talk about the methods in terms of the effects of those. So basically, this is the kind of the how and why. Now, question 2 is always the what question. This is the how and the why. So how this affects us. Well, I've said here all of this stuff about it's physically painful, it causes a distress, and then I've gone into even more methods here. And this is really quite sophisticated stuff, because I'm saying that, you know, excuse me, I could have simplified this. I could have said he repeats the verb aching, aching's in the present tense, and that shows that the pain still goes on and she doesn't think that the pain's ever going to stop. So I just wanted to have a bit more sophistication there, but equally you could have got this to the same point without that level. So this is the kind of high-level analysis of methods that you need to incorporate. So I am aware that this video is getting a bit long, probably longer than you guys want, particularly as you're right in the midst of exams, probably many of you watching this. So what I would then, how I would then bridge into my next point is that I would simply say, in source A, the writer does not feel the same degree of pain. In fact, now don't do this in your exam, don't write down into the margins, you would turn over, but just so I can keep this all on one screen. So I'm going to say the same degree, in fact, he feels accepting of the change. And then I would simply go into doing another similar point like I've done here. So I would find my example, my technique, and I would do this in the same way. So this is my kind of, I view these as like bridges. They are bridging from one source into the next. By comparing, I'm saying it doesn't feel the same sort of pain. In actual fact, he's more accepting. And then I go on to my next point. So, you know, I would probably do the same amount again on source A, and that would be considered one comparative point. So I've kind of done half a comparison and a bridge in this section here. And so then I'd be, you know, expecting to do, you know, this much again down here. And that would be classed as sort of one comparative peel. Now you should aim to do at least 2, if not 3. Now 16 marks, you know, you might say that that's about 18 minutes-ish if you're going minute by minute. I think you need to squeeze a bit more time into this because I think it's a trickier question. So I would be trying to spend around 25 minutes on this to make sure you've got a decent comparison in place. So just try and recap the key things around this. Make sure that you've identified, in this case, the differences, because that's what you're being asked for. It's all about the writer's points of view and the methods they use to convey that perspective. You must support your idea with some evidence or references. To me, that means quotes and techniques. And you must sort of explain how those examples are, you know, how the writer is using that to convey that point of view that they've got. So try and aim for 2 comparisons at least. Many of you, though, should try and push for 3. And I know that often people ask me about marks and stuff. This would be a full mark response as and when it's finished because of the level of sophisticated analysis of methods. Okay, I hope that's helped, and just best of luck on this question in your exams. Thanks for watching.